Hi, nerds. I hope you want to see some X-Men comics because I have a bunch of X-Men comics to show you. In fact, I have a ton of comics to show you in general. All these comics are new, mostly Marvel Bronze Age that I got that are pretty awesome, I think. So if you want to follow along and see them, I need to show you those comics so I can file them away in those boxes. And since I have so many, I typically do this every Saturday. I show you some of my comics. I got to up the ante a little bit because there's so many. So I think what I'm going to do is every Saturday will be a little bit of a variety pack. And then on Wednesdays will be a run because I also have a full run of Daredevil, like every Daredevil comic from 1 to 500 and whatever. So if you want to see that, I think that's going to be, runs are going to be on Wednesdays, and or maybe not. I think I might join the French Foreign Legion, and who knows what I'll do. The point is, like, I'm a grown man and I have a life, so I'm not going to be set by that schedule, but that's the plan for now. If you want to see comics and you want to follow along, you got to subscribe and ring the bell and whatever hoops that Google makes us jump through. So if you want to see the comics, do that. And then on Saturdays, again, will be kind of a variety pack. And on Wednesdays will be runs. And that way I can get that pile down faster into these boxes. And then everybody gets to look at cool comic book covers. And so for now, like I said, today is some funky X-Men stuff. So there's some modern, cool variants to like super old school stuff. So let's take a look. All right, let's start big. So most folks know that Chris Claremont took over the title at X-Men 94. This is X-Men 96. So this is super early into Claremont's run. This is known best because it's Moira McTaggart's first appearance. So that's her first appearance, and she's playing a large role in current X-Men, but this goes way back into the 70s, number 96. So shortly thereafter is number 100. So in Giant Size X-Men, this new group of heroes were introduced and kind of changed the X-Men forever. You know, you had Storm and Nightcrawler and Wolverine and Colossus, all those new X-Men introduced. And again, they started up in the title in 94. But it was these characters, the OG, the original 5, that started out X-Men and ran through like the 60s. And then they started doing reprints and sales fell off. And then they didn't really think the X-Men title had a life at all. Claremont took over in 94 with these new characters. And it was the biggest franchise in comic history. And so this is 100. I love this title because it has both teams. This is probably a 5. It's not a super high grade, but I love it nonetheless. This is, if you're an Alpha Flight fan, you know Guardian. Now Guardian didn't stay a member of Alpha Flight for long. His wife took over as leader of Alpha Flight in the same suit, Vindicator, but this started to really create Wolverine's backstory and the whole Canadian thing and Alpha Flight, and it was good stuff. So that's the first appearance of Guardian there. Jumping ahead, this is the final phase of the Phoenix. Obviously, that story is well known. It's part of the Dark Phoenix saga. It's a classic cover. People don't often appreciate enough that X-Men would go to space a lot. So they would go into the Shi'ar galaxy, Starjammers. This, of course, is Corsair, Cyclops' father. I love the Starjammers. I would just geek out if they would come to the MCU. That would be just about the greatest thing ever. A lot of folks love them some Warlock, so that's a neat cover. My favorite X-Men, Nightcrawler, just the dashing and daring and highly romantic swashbuckling Nightcrawler there. This is 238. This is a neat era of the X-Men where you had this early Australian years. Silvestri was doing the art at that time. the X-Men was at the height of their popularity. 207, that cover's awesome. Anytime I see it, I get it if it's a reasonable enough price, and I have a million of them. So this is Uncanny X-Men Annual number 11. This is right around that era when you had Longshot on the title. Havoc was there. And you can see there was a little crossover with some Excalibur, which we are going to get to now. Now, Excalibur is the title. They just fill up the dollar bins. But the thing about Excalibur, this is number 2. Excalibur was after that, the Fall of the Mutants, and you know, a lot of the classic team of X-Men was struggling with their powers. Kitty Pryde was struggling. She was intangible. Nightcrawler was injured, so he went over, and so they became Excalibur out of a lighthouse in Britain. And so written by Chris Claremont, drawn by Alan Davis. Alan Davis is awesome. Chris Claremont is a legend. It was a very British comic in that it was quirky and weird, and it was not to everyone's taste, but it was also highly popular because the X-Men were at the height of their popularity. So folks were buying it, but it wasn't necessarily the kind of thing that took off that had a tremendous amount of keys. It didn't introduce new characters. I mean, it did introduce some, establish some, but it wasn't the kind where it is highly collectible by speculators who are trying to get keys. But a certain vintage of nerd, they love this title. I love it because of Nightcrawler. And this storyline in particular, the Cross Time Caper, was supposed to be just a few issues. And I swear it went into a dozen, 15 issues, and it just kept going. And it was zany and wacky and all sorts of weird stuff. Rachel was a main character that established a lot of her relationship with Kitty. And again, it had Captain Britain. It had Megan. And it was great. This is one of the graphic novels that featured Excalibur. Later in the 90s, Arthur Adams on art, which Arthur Adams is a legend. He does so many essentially pin-up variant covers at this point. But in the 90s, Excalibur met Mojo, which is a fun little comic. So I have a few Wolverines here. This is an homage cover of Wolverine. You can see sort of the reflections. It's kind of case where it doesn't do as well as the Hulk cover. It's the famous Todd Father Hulk cover with the reflection of Hulk in Wolverine's claws. This tried to do something similar. It didn't do it as well. But these Wolverine comics were great. It started out being written by Claremont, of course. Claremont controlled all. He wanted his hands in everything, and eventually it became too many titles he couldn't. And so he started Wolverine, and Wolverine was taken over by Larry Hama. And as you know, that's the longtime writer of G.I. Joe. He wrote some Avengers. Larry Hama was he's a fantastic creator, vastly underrated. He wrote good stories. He took over Wolverine not too long into Claremont's run of this first volume of his solo title, and I think wrote to like 100 or something, tons and tons of issues. And he was the one that really deepened Wolverine's patch persona. A lot of the classic, there's Sabretooth battles, there's Cable in there, and again, this is 41 and 42, and so Larry Hama I love him. As a G.I. Joe nerd, that's where I first introduced him, and then when he took over Wolverine as a kid, I loved it. Now this is getting into the 90s. This is when I kind of I discovered girls and got out of comics a little bit, but now I have a full run of Wolverine. I filled in some of the gaps with these issues. So that is Wolverine. Those were classic late 80s, early 90s comics, and they're pretty pricey at this point, just because it's Wolverine. Now we're going to do something entirely different. These are some variant covers, some moderns. I mentioned the Australian era of X-Men. That was highlighted by Longshot and Dazzler being on the team during that time. That's great. This is J. Scott Campbell. Is he the most popular cover artist now? I don't know, maybe Peach Momoko, but Campbell has been cranking out variant covers, and then when I get them at a good price and it's, you know, my favorite X-Men, I always get it. And there's a neat cover there. That's look at Magic and Storm. Here's the same cover without coloring. It shows you how much coloring enhances a comic. Just really good work. I have 2 of those for some reason. Why do I have 2 of those? Here's a look at this cover in the black and white with Psylocke and Mystique. And then here it is in color. Again, all these are J. Scott Campbell. Here's something a little different. Polaris. I've long loved Polaris as a character, and I love this cover just because of the Polaris green and the green throughout the cover. I think that's super cool. And now, last 2 comics we're enclosed with something entirely different. This is the first appearance of Sauron. Sauron, as you know, is a big dinosaur that sucks the energy out of mutants. But this is not the version most folks recognize. This is the version from Mexico and Los Hombres X. And this is the first appearance. So this would have been X-Men number 60 in the United States, and this would have been X-Men number 61 in the United States. But in Mexico, it's 58, 59, and I love these looks. A lot of these are entirely overlooked by collectors, so these come very inexpensive. But the most interesting thing, they're way more rare, because obviously the English versions had the highest print run by far, and then these foreign editions didn't receive near the print run, but they're for some reason sort of undesirable by collectors. Me, however, I love them. All right, nerds, there you have it. Some X-Men, so kind of all over the place a little bit. So my vintage is Claremont. I love the Claremont X-Men and spinoffs. I loved even Excalibur, even though they fill up the dollar bins nowadays and aren't very collectible. And then you know, as a collector, you get a ton of comics. You got to start to diversify your collection. And so I've started to look more into these foreign editions. I think they're really cool, even though, you know, most collectors really just turn up their nose at those. I think they're really neat, just because of their, you know, their history in comic book collecting. So every Saturday I'll have a little bit of a mixed bag like this. On Wednesdays I'll have runs of comics, continuing Daredevil, all Daredevil. I think just subscribe so you won't follow along if you want to look at cool comic book covers. But thanks for watching. All right, you take care, nerds.